Good morning and welcome to Coffee with Dan. This morning I have Dr. Rohith Delilkhan. He's a Sri Lankan by birth but holds the UK nationality. He has educated in Germany and Switzerland, holding a PhD in communications and a master's degree in philosophy and literature from University of Constance in Germany. He has worked in over 8 countries. I beg your pardon. He has lived in 8 countries and worked in over 28 countries in the world. He has a vast experience in management consultancy and especially in the hospitality trade. Today, we are going to discuss about Sri Lanka's potentials in tourism. Welcome. And good morning to you.
Good morning, Dan.
Okay.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
If we get back, address the main topic about potentials tourism industry in Sri Lanka, how does Sri Lanka compare as a travel destination to its main rivals such as Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Myanmar, like that?
Well, I would say, first of all, Sri Lanka is smaller in a way, and in a positive sense, you get everything within a short traveling distance. If you travel to Indonesia and want to, go diving there or see nature in all its beauty, sometimes you have to travel 24, even 48 hours, including a plane ride within Indonesia to get to a place. In this country, which is fairly small compared to others, it's very easy to get from one place to another. I know people sometimes complain about Sri Lanka saying it's a 6 or 7 or even 9-hour overland ride from Colombo to Pasikuda, say. But that's nothing in international travel terms, because if you're in the Philippines or in Indonesia or in Myanmar, which are all of the countries I've traveled, it takes you days to get to places you want to be. And people are willing to do that as travelers. So if we say it's a 9-hour journey to Pasikuda, there's no reason to complain at all. And in a positive sense, when we compare Sri Lanka to these countries, it is the proximity of all the delights. You can see Yala with its wildlife, or Wilpattu. You can go into the hill country up to Nuwara and see beautiful things there and enjoy the pleasant climate. You can go to beaches anywhere you like in this country. So, and then we have the cultural sites across the country, but all very close to each other. So that's, I would say, the main advantage in a way of the country, is that everything is close by. In terms of disadvantages, of course, pricing is one of the main deterrents. If you go to any of these other countries, for half the budget you would need for Sri Lanka for the same period of time and for the same experiences, you would get the same kind of quality and service in any of these destinations. So that is one of the challenges we face. How can we convince people to come to Sri Lanka with a much higher budget expectation? But if we think of the fact that everything's close by, then again, it takes the tediousness of travel out of many things. And, if I have to travel to a nice destination in Indonesia and it takes me 48 hours from Jakarta to get there, it's 2 days lost one way, and that's something we should capitalize on. But in terms of competitiveness, these are strong competitors, because if you go anywhere in the world, say to the Chinese, to the Europeans, and they're looking at destinations to go to, Sri Lanka doesn't always fare that well when comparing prices. On the other hand, there's another thing that I feel Sri Lanka has, which is very positive, and that is it's a safe country to travel in. People like to travel here. And if I ask people, what do you like about Sri Lanka, and I do ask a lot of travelers, they say the first thing that comes to their mind is the people. And that is also an asset we rarely think about. We always talk about the natural beauties of the country, the cultural assets we have, but if you talk about a country, the thing that's most memorable, and I like to think about people who come back again and again to this place. And the Germans, for instance, are very faithful travelers when it comes to countries they like to visit, if they like the people. And of the long stay tourists, who we need most, because they spend most money everywhere. They go to many different destinations, and so the distribution of tourism income is more fair in a way than if we just have short stay tourists coming into Colombo, or just hopping with a quick bus ride going, say, to Galle or to Sigiriya, Anuradhapura, and then coming back and leaving the country again in a hurry. They don't spend that much, but the long stay tourist does. And the faithful tourist is the one who actually likes the people and comes back to this country. People say that Sri Lankans have the most natural smile and are among the friendliest people in the world. So yeah, those are some of the things I think are assets which we have more than others.
You very correctly mentioned, Dr. Rohith, that Sri Lanka has some very unique features as a tourist destination. Also, at the same time, the price factor really is challenge in promoting Sri Lanka's tourism. Now, when it comes to Sri Lanka's tourism, we have the domestic travelers as well as foreign travelers. So, considering all these aspects, what do modern travelers expect of a tourism destination?
Very good question, Dan. Now, I think we have to define the modern traveler first. What is that? I think the modern traveler is someone, there are people, and these are both local, because Sri Lankans have been very conscious travelers actually. When you talk to Sri Lankans who like to travel, who see their own country and also who travel abroad, there are many who also consider the footprint, economic and also the social and the, how should I say, the ecological footprint that you leave behind. And the ecological footprint today is a decisive factor for many people to travel. So people choose a destination very often by saying, am I going to cause a lot of pollution? Is the country clean? And do people take care of their environment? Am I making a very negative impact on the environment when I travel? And Sri Lankans have that natural DNA of being very conscious of their environment, actually, if you take it seriously. So the modern traveler, on the one hand, has this facet of being conscious about the environment they step into. On the other hand, the modern traveler is looking for a different type of experience. If you remember, decades ago, we used to laugh about tourists coming with their cameras and taking snapshots of everything, be it the stylized American in his Hawaiian shirt running around with his camera, or the Japanese or the Chinese, for instance. Today, most travelers are individual or small groups who travel together to experience a destination. And that experience has brought us back to things in travel which for many decades were lost. Today, many travelers want to walk. If you go around Colombo and see people, say foreign tourists, you see many of them on foot, walking places. And walking classically is the best way to experience a country. I remember when I was a student, I walked through Portugal. I walked from Lisbon to Porto, which is a couple of 100 kilometers, and I did that in 3 weeks. I was a student, so I had the leisure and liberty to travel 3 weeks, and it was, I would say, my best holiday. Now, not every country lends itself to walking. I tried to walk Finland, but I found it was impossible. There were so many mosquitoes, and it was a difficult country to travel through, and it was so barren, you didn't experience much by walking. So not every country lends itself, but parts of Sri Lanka certainly lend themselves to walking. Another type of tourism which is becoming more popular also with locals is cycling, because you experience the country in a much more intensive way, and that's something we need to think about in terms of harnessing the tourism capabilities of our country. Do we create spaces where people can walk more? There is around here, there are also parks where you can run, cycle, etc. I think we have to expand that concept a bit more if we want to actually allow people to use the space we have. Currently, it's everyone gets into a car and goes from A to B, gets into traffic, curses about the traffic, obviously, and many of your listeners are now in the traffic going to work. But the walk as a tourism aspect, if you go, say, to Kalpitiya, which is a beautiful destination in Sri Lanka and, is very reminiscent for me of, say, Trincomalee in the 80s or 90s, you can walk a lot of places there on those fairly lonely roads, and you can experience a lot. And I think that is something we have to think about with the modern traveler. The modern traveler is also more educated with social media and with all the aspects of, having a map on your phone and destinations on the phone. When they arrive in places, they don't have to ask around that much. They can find out a lot about where to go, what to see, what to do. And what I find is in Sri Lanka that apart from mainstream tourism providers, from hotels to travel operators, the local communities are not digitalized. So they have no access to income opportunities and also to presenting themselves to the local and the foreign traveler. Hey, we have a little restaurant here. I have a bicycle shop here where I can lend you bicycles to travel around. So that is something I think we need to work on in this country to attract people onto, to have a larger platform for the whole population. Because as long as we don't get the entire population involved in tourism, it is always a bit of a threat, because people might feel that tourism is something that they're not benefiting from and thus don't want to engage in.
Dr. Rohith, you also became a finalist for the Innovation Awards at the World Tourism Forum 2017 in Lausanne, Switzerland. Now, when it comes to tourism in Sri Lanka, what are the innovative ideas that you can share with our listeners?
Well, one of the things coming back to the digitalization, many hotels in Sri Lanka have started projects where they try to involve local communities to get people, say, who are coconut pickers, for instance, to demonstrate that to traveler, what it means to climb up a coconut tree, how you get the coconuts down, what you can do with coconuts, all these things, just to take one example here. Or a local family that cooks for guests from abroad. This is becoming more and more popular, by the way, even with cruise ships. When they go to a certain destination, say in the South Seas, when they disembark, they no longer go as, 2,000 people and invade a site. They're distributed into very small groups that engage with the local community. And hotels here have started that too, because that gives a very authentic experience. When I said earlier, Sri Lankans are naturally friendly people, they're also naturally hospitable. And if we think of tourism in those terms, I think innovation is spreading tourism across the community and making use of the natural assets we have, first of all, which is the people, and their food, their welcoming style, and secondly, getting them onto platforms, because people have to know about this. Now, if you're lucky and you have a hotel close by, it's easy for you perhaps to engage through that operator with travelers, be they local or foreign. Yeah? But I remember I was once discussing with a group of very small entrepreneurs in Batiklo. There was a lady whose mother had opened a little mini spa with their little hotel guest house that they had. They had 6 rooms and they had fantastic food, and they had both foreign and local guests coming and staying with them, and they really gave a wonderful hospitality experience. I also went over and saw what they were doing. So that kind of thing is existent, but they had no access. It was all word of mouth. And this is when you go to countries like Vietnam, for instance, or the Philippines or Indonesia, there's much more digital presence of the overall community dealing with tourism than there is in Sri Lanka. So what happens then is that most of our travelers, including the local travelers, just flock to the mainstay destinations. Now, if we think of our wonderful cultural heritage sites, only a fraction of them have actually been mapped and are really available to us. There are so many, old ancient places and ruins that are not even on the map yet. And people sometimes complain there are too many people congesting Sigiriya or Anuradhapura, for instance, or Polonnaruwa. But if we think about it, we have so many other places we could go to and revive these sites and perhaps get even private investors to restore some of them, because people do appreciate these things in this country. There's a lot that could be done. So in terms of innovation, I would say the main innovation would be the digitalization of the tourism world in Sri Lanka, which is not happening yet.
The price factor of Sri Lanka's hotels that we were dealing with before. Do Sri Lankans know how rich and diverse the assets of this country are, so that we could really disregard this price tag over the resources that we do have?
Yes, and I think we have an opportunity to kind of, pricing is always, relative. People appreciate a destination for what it gives them in terms of an experience. And if we provide the right experience, then I think price will not matter so much. If someone really wants to go to a cheap destination, you would say, let me go to Bali or to Phuket. Phuket and Bali are small destinations. None of them is larger than Greater Colombo. Yet Phuket gets more than 10 million tourists a year, just in comparative numbers. And a lot of that tourism is so-called, mass tourism, cheap tourism. Now, I have nothing against mass tourism or cheap tourism, because every model of tourism works for a certain community in a certain way. So we shouldn't be too critical of it. But Sri Lanka doesn't have that freedom to decide on it because, first of all, we have an airport with limited capacity, so we can't take in so many people. We can't handle the 10 million unless we really build our inbound and outbound travel capacity. Then we also have a strong local tourist base, which you already mentioned. There are a lot of Sri Lankans like to travel their country and they enjoy it, and that's a wonderful thing. And I think that is always the backbone of tourism in any nation. A healthy format of tourism is when you can travel, when you have lots of local travelers. But for the local travelers today, one of the risk factors is many of them consider, if I go to Bangkok over the weekend, the air ticket out, staying there and eating and coming back is cheaper than spending a weekend in Bentota, for instance. And if we have that as an issue, with the local tourists being drained out of the country, and that is one of our risk issues, we have to also impress upon the local traveler how wonderful this country actually can be. There are so many places that have not been fully discovered yet. Coming back, I mentioned Kalpiti and how wonderful I found it is. If you stroll through the streets there and or the roadsides and see the donkeys passing by, it's got that touch and feel of a place like Portugal or Spain 40 years ago. And that is something you can only find there. And those are experiences I'm sure any traveler who's intelligent will be able to experience, but they have to go there, of course. And I think promoting tourism or branding it locally with our locals and making them more aware of what we have is quite important, because I'm not sure people realize, we have the classic assets, our cultural triangle, the mountains and hills, hill country, the beaches, etc. But in between, there are so many cultural tourism assets that have not been discovered yet. There are so many old ruins in this country that nobody knows about. They are gazetted somewhere, but no one has taken the trouble even of putting up a signpost that this place was populated 2,000 years ago, and this is a palace, by the way. We've done it for a few of our sites, but this country has many, many more. So you can really go on journeys of discovery. Or if you look at the way certain tourism destinations or assets are being wrongly utilized. And here I'm coming to some of the risk factors of tourism in this country. Let me take Pigeon Island on the east coast, which is our only real marine park asset we have in this country, although it was for the protection of pigeons that it was originally put in place. Today, if you go to Nilavali on the Trinco side, and as a local or as a foreigner, you go across to Pigeon Island to see the corals, apparently. But most people can't swim who go over there. They get off the boats, they trample over the corals, and they sit on a very crowded beach. And Nilavali has some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. You don't have to go to Pigeon Island and sit on the rocks there to enjoy the beach. But why does that happen? The local fishermen and the local tour operators have discovered that they can charge for foreigners $10 per boat ride. So they can put 8 or 10 people onto a boat and cart them over on a busy day at a weekend with about 300 Sri Lankans and about 200 tourists populating that island. It has become a filthy mess. There are no longer any pigeons to be seen. It's full of crows. The island is covered in junk and debris and food waste. And it has underwater one of the most exciting actually fish populations in the country, which is also important, by the way, because it is a fish nursery. So a lot of fish lay their eggs there. It is actually important for fishermen because if that area is troubled by too many people, you can't actually, get maximum benefit for the local population either. So it's being destroyed. The corals are degrading. Many people have talked about this. But what they don't realize is that place has some wonderful underwater assets. Like it has one of the largest shark populations that I've come across. Over 100 black tip reef sharks. There are lemon sharks there, very rare in Sri Lanka. You don't get it, and those sharks are very communicative. There's a place in Thailand where they do these shark visits, where these sharks come around you. They speak to you. We don't understand their language, but they engage with people, and these sharks do as well. So there is a lot of tourism opportunity there, but you have to reduce it, not having people trample over corals. And the infrastructure is not there in Pigeon Island. Now, you would need proper piers. we don't build piers in this country. And this is one of our serious threats, because I've seen old people get onto boats, fall off boats, break a leg. In Trincomalee, in Nilavali, in Kalpiti, I've seen boats capsized because with the waves we sometimes get, we have to have piers. In all other countries, in Thailand, in Vietnam, in Myanmar, in Indonesia and the Philippines, we have piers everywhere for people to get on boats and get off boats safely. We don't do that. We should have glass-bottom boats for those destinations so people don't have to sit on the corals. They can see them safely. And we should think about things like solar boats, because if you're talking about, coming back to our question, how to make this an attractive destination with the pricing we have, we should go solar. We have whales and dolphins. We have the largest whale congregations that have ever occurred on Earth off the shores of Sri Lanka. 350, humpback whales seen about 2 years ago. So lots of fantastic things, but our way of accessing it is troublesome.
Yes. Doctor, my final question is that when we talk about tourism promotion or development in this country, we know that we have a very rich cultural heritage to protect. And some of the view that certain tourists damage this cultural heritage. And also the fact that with the spreading of communicable diseases such as HIV and AIDS, our local community are at the risk with all these things due to tourism development. So how do you see these risks and how to overcome these things?
I think all these risks are very present everywhere. One, in terms of damaging cultural assets, I think the important thing is how we manage those assets and also the numbers of people we allow to go there at one given time, channeling the flow. By creating more cultural assets, because there are so many more cultural assets we have which we have not really revived in this country. We have to think about getting funding either from donor organizations, foreign investors or local investors. Government does not have that spending capability, and I understand that, but you can maybe get that organized in a different way and increase the number of potential destinations in the country, because there are many. I mean, at every doorstep in this country you can find something interesting. Many countries now, like the UK, have these village tourism projects where you do treasure hunts in villages, where you go and see all the sites in a village and you collect them and you get a little award at the end. And the village may be a completely unimportant village otherwise. But if you do that in Sri Lanka, say in small communities, get people to travel out of the mainstream things, get awards, get mementos, a photograph of themselves at a site that's different, we can start diversifying and dispersing the numbers. And on the other hand, I think for the local communities, if you talk about things like HIV, I think we have to also educate from children to adults what, not only the risks of tourism, because that is also spread internally in this country, because we have travelers from our country who go abroad and contract diseases and come back. We have to make people more aware, because I think the more informed people are and the more they understand what beauties and wonders they have in their country and how to protect themselves and their assets, because not every tourist is a good tourist. That's true. I think we'll be in a better position. I mean, every country faces this. Tourism is going to double in the world in the next 10 years in terms of numbers. And there are a lot of countries already which have trouble with too much tourism. I don't think we have reached those numbers yet in Sri Lanka to be troubled, but we have to manage our assets more carefully.
Today in Coffee with Dan, I was joined by Dr. Rohith Delilkhan. He is a director of several international companies dealing with tourism and hospitality, and he is also the finalist of the Innovation Awards at the World Tourism Forum in 2017 in Lausanne, Switzerland. He is presently traveling in Sri Lanka because he is a UK national and he lived in over 8 countries, working in 28 destinations in the world, and he specializes in tourism promotion and helping Sri Lanka to gain its tourism identity. Thank you very much, Rohith, for joining this discussion in Coffee with Dan today.
Thank you, Dan. It was my pleasure.
And we will meet again tomorrow with another interesting topic in Coffee with Dan.